Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Trust you've had a good week. It's certainly been very beautiful here on the outskirts of Nairobi. The birds are a cacophony in the mornings, and it's as if nature has reasserted itself around me. Let me start with macro thoughts. Looking for a V-shaped economic recovery, not so fast. Stanley Druckenmiller warned. I'd said the same thing a few weeks ago. A V-shaped recovery, I'd said, is a fantasy. I like this, introducing a new accounting term, EBITDAC, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, amortization, and coronavirus. It is literally a fiction, said Lisa Abramovitz, and she's right. It probably takes a maximum 10 more tweets from President Trump for Chairman Powell to go to negative interest rates. And I tweeted a few days ago, and the forward Fed funds curve is getting more negative. That's confirmed by Bianco Research. And the big issue, notwithstanding the surge in food prices, is with oil prices at current levels, US headline inflation is expected to fall sharply below zero. And that will be the excuse to cut interest rates below zero. As I said previously, we're in the realms of behavioral economics now. And Druckenmiller said much the same. I don't see why anybody would change their behavior because there's a viral drug out there. And that confirms that the virus is not correlated to endogenous market dynamics, but remains an exogenous uncertainty that remains unresolved, notwithstanding some bullish comments coming out of all corners. Paul Tudor Jones, the best profit maximizing strategy is to own the fastest horse. In a market outlook he entitled The Great Monetary Inflation. And around the same time he was saying on CNBC gold is going substantially higher. It's been a store of value for 2,500 years, and he's expecting it to take out the peaks of the 1970s and 1980s, as I do. Production growth of bullion is 1% annually, while the Fed is creating money supply at a 30% pace, taking out the peaks of the 70s and 80s. And gold was last trading at 1736. And as I said on the 24th of February, before we had a sell-off admittedly, I said the viral moment has arrived, and at this point I would venture gold is correlated to the coronavirus, which is set to turn parabolic and is already non-linear and exponential. And then I reiterated that conviction on the 22nd of March. I said, I still believe gold will soon turn viral to the upside, and I'm looking for more than $2,000. Many say that gold is useless and has no social value. Tell that to emerging market citizens. That's from Danielle Lacalle. And you can see what an awful situation it has been for many emerging market currencies. Home thoughts, one of my favorite filmed footage that we've ever done. We were visiting Mzima Springs in Savo West, where you can now see the snow-capped Mount Kilimanjaro. And we came across at least, there must have been about 80 elephants that night in the evening light, myself and Hannah. And it was such a thrilling experience. And do watch it, it's about 8 or 9 minutes. Dystopian public service announcements echoed through the airport is an article about flying today in the Atlantic. Have a listen, because it certainly confirms the way we live now. Don DeLillo wrote, "Everything is barely weeks, everything is days, we have minutes to live." And that took me to Black Plaques, London 350 years ago, and here's your choice of endings. Have a look at that, because it kind of confirms things that have been going on today. Dark Day 1780, der unheimliche Tag, an dem die Welt beinahe unterging. And that is saying in a different way, it certainly feels like a decade of semiotic arousal when everything it seemed was a sign, a harbinger of some future radical disjuncture or cataclysmic upheaval. According to Ibn Ishaq, Al-Qidr will remain alive until the end of days when the Dajjal will kill him. Therefore, he unites past, present, and future in his life. That's A.A. Olomi. Al-Qidr is associated strongly with dreams and dream divination. There are various popular folk prayers used to invoke a visitation from him or to ascertain the answer to a question. There is a luminous and fairy tale feel to life in quarantine. You felt the land taking you back to what was there 100 years ago, to what had been there always. And BBC Have Your say Antarctica is the only continent without any cases of coronavirus. Val Afshar, The Beauty of Kung Fu Cemetery. Worth watching. It's just a short little clip. It's extraordinary, the symmetry of it. And that took me to something I wrote in October 2018, where I said, war is coming. And in brackets yesterday, I put, but it looks like it is already lost. I am asked a lot recently, will a war break out between China and the US? This is Hugh of Global Times. Will a war break out between China and the US? My answer, the two countries increasingly dislike each other. Various conflicts are rising. Therefore, a risk for a military clash is increasing. But meanwhile, they don't want a war. Am I right? And you know my thesis, that I do think this was deliberately propagated worldwide, and as such, it is an example of biological warfare. Asked in a Fox Business Network interview whether he had spoken to Xi recently, Trump said they have a very good relationship, but right now I don't want to speak to him, I don't want to speak to him. Trump was played. Unprompted, he said, we could cut off the whole relationship. If we did, what would happen? You'd save $500 billion, an inaccurate reference to the volume of trade between the countries. Trump has sought to blame China for the coronavirus pandemic, as public confidence in his handling of the US outbreak has sunk. There have been more than 1.3 million cases of COVID-19 in the US and at least 82,900 deaths, the most in the world. China has reported only about 4,600 deaths from the disease, but we know that cannot be true. Edward Luce in the Financial Times, inside Trump's coronavirus meltdown, is an extraordinary article. When the history is written of how America handled the global era's first real pandemic, March 6 will leap out of the timeline. That was the day Trump visited the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta. His foray to the world's best disease research body was meant to showcase that America had everything under control. It came midway between the time he was still denying the coronavirus posed a threat and the moment he said he had always known it could ravage America. Shortly before the CDC visit, Trump said within a couple of days, infections are going to be down to close to zero. The US then had 15 cases. He clearly never understood the exponential function. One day, it's like a miracle, it will disappear. That afternoon at the CDC provides an X-ray into Trump's mind at the halfway point between denial and acceptance. We now know that COVID-19 had already passed the breakout point in the US. There would be 4 million testing kits available within a week. The tests are beautiful, he said. Anybody that needs a test gets a test. 10 weeks later, that is still not close to being true. Fewer than 3% of Americans had been tested by mid-May. Trump also boasted about his grasp of science. He cited a super genius uncle, John Trump, who taught at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and implied he inherited his intellect. I really get it, he said. South Korea, which has a population density nearly 15 times greater and is next door to China, has lost a total of 259 lives to the disease. Again and again, the story that emerged is of a president who ignored increasingly urgent intelligence warnings from January, in fact before, dismisses anyone who claims to know more than him, and trusts no one outside a tiny coterie led by his daughter Ivanka and her husband Jared Kushner. Trump's handling of the pandemic at home and abroad has exposed more painfully than anything since he took office the meaning of America First, says William Burns, now head of the Carnegie Endowment. America is first in the world in deaths, first in the world in infections, and we stand out as an emblem of global incompetence. The damage to America's influence and reputation will be very hard to undo. It's actually practically criminal, because had he been ahead of the curve, he would have been able to distinguish America from China. Jared Kushner had been arguing that testing too many people or ordering too many ventilators would spook the markets, and so we just shouldn't do it, says a Trump confidant. The economy was just steaming along, the stock market was firing on all cylinders, and the jobs report was fantastic, says Moore. It was almost too perfect. Nobody expected this virus. It hit us like a meteor or a terrorist attack. The inquiry would find that Trump was warned countless times of the epidemic threat in his presidential daily briefings by federal scientists, the health secretary, Alex Azar, Peter Navarro, his trade advisor, Matt Pottinger, his Asia advisor, by business friends and the world at large. It is as though we knew for a fact that 9/11 was going to happen for months, did nothing to prepare for it, and then shrugged a few days later and said, oh well, there's not much we can do about it, says Greg Gonsalves. Trump could have prevented mass deaths, and he didn't. The CDC has been missing in action, says a former senior advisor in the Trump White House. Because of the CDC's errors, we did not have a true picture of the spread of the disease. Redfield led the Pentagon's response to HIV/AIDS in the 1980s. It involved isolating suspected soldiers in so-called HIV hotels. Many who tested positive were dishonorably discharged. Some committed suicide. A devout Catholic, Redfield saw AIDS as the product of an immoral society. Redfield is about the worst person you could think of to be heading the CDC at this time, says Laurie Garrett, a Pulitzer Prize-winning science journalist who's reported on epidemics. Advising Trump was like bringing fruits to the volcano. You're trying to appease a great force that's impervious to reason. Trump's mindset became increasingly surreal. He began to tout hydrochloroquine as a cure for COVID-19. It could be one of the biggest game changers in the history of medicine, he later tweeted. I was pressured to let politics and cronism drive decisions over the opinions of the best scientists we have in government, Bright said in a statement in a whistleblower complaint. He said he was pressured to send millions of dollars worth of contracts to a company controlled by a friend of Jared Kushner. The way to keep your job is to out-loyal everyone else, which means you have to tolerate quackery, says Anthony Scaramucci, an estranged former Trump advisor. An administration official says advising Trump is like bringing fruits to the volcano, Trump being the lava source. You're trying to appease a great force that's impervious to reason. When Trump suggested in late April that people could stop COVID-19 or even cure themselves by injecting disinfectant such as Lysol or Dettol, his chief scientist Deborah Birx did not dare contradict him. It's like saying to the governors that each state has to produce its own tanks and bullets, says Bernard. You're on your own, it's not my responsibility. The WHO confirms that Trump met the then Director General designate, Tedros, in the Oval Office in June 2017, shortly before he took up the role. Trump supported his candidacy. Other critics say the Geneva-based body was too ready to take Beijing's word at face value. There is some truth to that claim, more than some truth. They were too scared of offending China, says Bernard. Trump administration officials, including Pompeo, have repeatedly suggested COVID-19 originated from a bat-to-human transmission in Wuhan's virology lab. Yes, it did. We used to think of America as the world's leading power, not as the epicenter of disease, says Fullilove, who is an ardent pro-American. We increasingly feel caught between a reckless China and a feckless America that no longer seems to care about its allies. Both Trump and Kushner have all but declared mission accomplished on the pandemic. This is a great success story, said Kushner in late April. We have prevailed, said Trump on Monday. Economists say a V-shaped recovery is unlikely. Even then, it could be two V's stuck together, a W in other words. As long as the second V began only after November, Trump might just be re-elected. From Trump's point of view, there is no choice, says Charlie Black. It is the economy or nothing. He can't exactly run on his personality. The White House internal polling shows that his once double-digit lead over Biden among Americans over 65 has been wiped out. It turns out retirees are no fans of herd immunity. Trump is caught in a box in which he keeps getting smaller, says George Conway. In my view, he's a sociopath and a malignant narcissist. When a person suffering from these disorders feels the world closing in on them, their tendencies get worse, they lash out and fantasize and lose any ability to think rationally. Trump is deaf to advice, said one. He is his own worst enemy, said another. He only listens to family, said a third. He is mentally imbalanced, said a fourth. America, in other words, should brace itself for a turbulent 6 months ahead with no assurance of a safe landing. Here you see coffins of people who have died from COVID-19 lined up in a funeral home in Queens, New York. Recent estimates suggest 135,000 people will die by late July. This is a great success story, said Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law and advisor. Kushner's advice to avoid alarming the markets is said to have had more influence on the president than the warnings from scientists. We have prevailed, said Trump at a White House news briefing about the coronavirus earlier this week. Trump, of course, has suspended US funding of the WHO. Here you see the DG Tedros. As I quoted Jenna Friedman, a reality TV star botched the response to a global pandemic, and now we are all imprisoned in our homes and forced to watch him daily. What is thriving, however, is all that ridiculous red culture and nauseating adulation that the system heaps on itself via shameless pro-party hacks who chirrup hosannas at every turn. Pelagius, the virus may be the most dangerous adversary America has ever faced. It's like the US was invaded. The normal defenses fail, it can't be bombed, bank accounts can't be frozen, unbreakable morale, no supply chain, lives off the land, infinite reinforcements and fully decentralized. I wrote, to watch the daily briefing is to understand that the control machine has a novice, a hubristic Narcissus in charge of the console. And finally, President Trump did not understand the exponential function. And therefore, the Gladwell moment definitively arrived, and he didn't even know it had. Where is the 302? It is missing. Was it stolen or destroyed? General Flynn is being persecuted. Obamagate, tweeted Trump. And then I watched a clip from The Daily Show, which is rather witty. In it, he's referring to Barack Hussein Jihad, Nairobi, Kenya, Obama, which I thought was pretty good. Trump is a linguistic warfare specialist. Now let's turn to the UK and a very fascinating thread from Stefan Szymanowicz. There's often a moment in the third act of a Hitchcock thriller, The Big Reveal, when the scales fall from the eyes of the hapless central character and he realizes the answer he's been searching for has been in front of his nose all along. Then he plays a clip of the armchair epidemiologist, which is rather good, and he's describing how a week later the herd immunity strategy was unveiled. Herd immunity is a form of indirect protection from infectious disease that occurs when a large percentage of a population becomes immune to an infection, whether through previous infections or vaccination. Remember that, I'll come to that in a second. Rather than trying to completely suppress the number of infections, some argue that the real strategy was to allow COVID-19 to spread through the population slowly without overwhelming healthcare capacity. That was the reason for the late lockdown, not banning public events, etc. One epidemiologist said it's sacrificing the vulnerable on the altar of the economy in truly vast numbers. Protecting the economy is vital, but those arguing against a herd immunity without vaccine strategy make clear that it would involve, in the words of one epidemiologist, sacrificing the vulnerable on the altar of the economy in truly vast numbers. There's a risk that new diseases such as coronavirus will trigger a panic and a desire for market segregation that go beyond what is medically rational to the point of doing real and unnecessary economic damage. Watch that short video clip of Boris Johnson. Now Stefan refers to 2016 film Hypernormalization, shows how Putin, advised by Vladislav Surkov, turned Russian politics into a bewildering, constantly changing piece of theatre. There is speculation about Cummings' links with Surkov, allegedly forged during his mysterious 3 years in Russia. During the election campaign, the Prime Minister simply refused to do the Andrew Neil show, but now inexperienced ministers like Helen Whately are sent into the lion's den twice in a week. Baker says Cummings uses controversy to keep things in the news, but crucially he's also using it to keep other things out of the news. Bizarre as it sounds, does Cummings want our focus to be on testing, PPE, care homes, airports, etc., in order to distract us from something else? Those of us attempting to make sense of the government's mind-bending COVID strategy fall into two broad categories: the conspiracy theorists and the cock-up theorists. Their actual strategy uses cock-up to mask conspiracy, and we're running out of time. Anyone who works in government comms will confirm that the stay alert confusion is not accidental. This messaging would have been worked on for weeks. The Prime Minister's speech was carefully scripted and pre-recorded. They wanted to create confusion. Could the Prime Minister's strategists be purposefully sowing confusion and controversy to distract from the new NHSX app, which is being fast-tracked for public use despite major privacy concerns? Putin's strategist Surkov created an ongoing state of bewilderment. So takeaways from this thread: herd immunity scandal is still going. They are playing us. Listen to scientists. Is Cummings trying to turn the UK into a managed democracy like Surkov attempted in Russia? We may never know. In Adam Curtis's marvellous film, which I've watched many times and shared with you, it's a strategy of power that keeps any opposition constantly confused, a ceaseless shape-shifting that is unstoppable because it is indefinable. Have a read of Dominic Cummings' October 2014 The Hollow Men, Mr. Kurtz, He Dead. A penny for the old guy. We are the hollow men, we are the stuffed men, leaning together, headpiece filled with straw, alas. Between the idea and the reality, between the motion and the act, falls the shadow. Blowfield. Kronstein, you are sure this plan is foolproof? Kronstein, yes it is, because I have anticipated every possible variation of counter-move. Technology can inflict huge physical destruction and help manipulate the feelings and ideas of many people, including sometimes particularly the best educated, through information operations. Further, technology makes it easier to do these things potentially without detection, which could render conventional deterrence obsolete. And basically, it's very, very interesting. He also mentions Palantir, and if you're a conspiracy theorist, it's going to make you wonder what exactly he's talking about so long ago. I take you back to Boris Johnson at UNGA. He spoke of smart cities which will pullulate with sensors, all joined together by the Internet of Things, bollards communing invisibly with lampposts, and asked, how do you plead with an algorithm? Returning to Surkov, Putin's system was also ripe for export, Surkov added. Foreign governments were already paying close attention since the Russian political algorithm had long predicted the volatility now seen in Western democracies. With a flourish, he sponsored lavish art festivals for the most provocative modern artists in Moscow, then supported orthodox fundamentalists dressed all in black and carrying crosses, who in turn attacked the modern art exhibitions. It was the first non-linear war, writes Surkov in a new short story, Without Sky, published under his pseudonym and set in a dystopian future after the Fifth World War. One of Surkov's many nicknames is the political technologist of all of Rus. Political technologists are the new Russian name for a very old profession. Viziers, grey cardinals, and wizards of Oz. My portfolio at the Kremlin and in government has included ideology, media, political parties, religion, modernization, innovation, foreign relations, and here he pauses and smiles, modern art. A ceaseless shape-shifting that is unstoppable because it is undefinable. The underlying aim, Surkov says, is not to win the war, but to use the conflict to create a constant state of destabilized perception in order to manage and control. The first thing is plausible deniability. The second thing is non-linearity. You have to learn how to navigate a linear system in a non-linear way. Beppe Grillo, the comic-turned-leader of the Five-Star Movement in Italy, said, "This is the deflagration of an epoch. It's the apocalypse of this information system, of the TVs, of the big newspapers, of the intellectuals, of the journalists." And he is right, traditional media has been disrupted and the insurgents can broadcast live and over the top. From feeding the hothouse conspiracy online, a constant state of destabilized perception, timely and judicious doses of WikiLeaks leaks, I'm talking about the US election, which drained Hillary's bona fides and her turnout and motivated Trump's, what we've witnessed is something remarkable and noteworthy. And I concluded by saying Putin has proven himself an information master, and his adversaries are his information victims. And obviously, Dominic Cummings has learned something from all of that. Only 4.4% of the French population has been infected by coronavirus, says the Pasteur Institute. And that puts paid to any thoughts about herd immunity, I'm afraid. As a consequence, our results show that without a vaccine, the herd immunity alone will not be enough to avoid a second wave at the end of the lockdown. Efficient control measures must thus be upheld after May 11. Global cases trend up, more than 10%, Guatemala, more than 5%, Brazil, Peru, Chile, Qatar, Bangladesh, South Africa, Afghanistan, Oman, Bolivia, Cameroon, Honduras, Somalia, DRC, Mayotte, El Salvador, and Gabon. And I was talking about this when I said, spoke of COVID and the spillover moment out of the developed markets into the emerging and frontier markets. They fancied themselves free, wrote Camus, and no one will ever be free so long as there are pestilences. In this respect, our townsfolk were like everybody else, wrapped up in themselves. In other words, they were humanists. They disbelieved in pestilences. A pestilence isn't a thing made to man's measure, therefore we tell ourselves that a pestilence is a mere bogey of the mind, a bad dream that will pass away. But it doesn't always pass away, and from one bad dream to another, it is men who pass away, and the humanists first of all, because they have taken no precautions. Bianco research, meanwhile, outside the US, the third highest day of new infections was today, and that's what I was referencing. The coronavirus problem that India had feared is becoming a reality in Mumbai's New York Times. It is India's most densely populated city, a scraggly peninsula framed by the Arabian Sea and other waterways, a metropolis of towering apartment blocks and endless slums, a city of oversized dreams and desperate poverty all sandwiched together. This is where Asia's richest man, Mukesh Ambani, built a 27-story single-family home. This is where Slumdog Millionaire was filmed and set. Indians call it Maximum City. Mumbai has suffered the worst. City of 20 million is now responsible for 20% of India's infections and nearly 25% of the deaths. Hospitals are overflowing with the sick, and temperatures climbing towards 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Many can't stand to be cooped up anymore and spill onto the streets. This is the Dharavi slum, Mumbai's biggest, and this is preparing a quarantine center in Mumbai last week. Gulf, Latin America, and Africa show the big rises in active cases over the last week. Charlie Robertson, spillover. The viral moment has arrived. And as you know, a service at Shinjeonji Church, a single person, patient 31, caused over 5,000 cases. It is estimated that as few as 1,000 SARS-CoV-2 viral particles are needed for an infection to take hold. If a person coughs or sneezes, 200 million viral particles go everywhere. That's the way we live now. As I said on the 1st of March, there's always more to it. This is what history consists of. It is the sum total of things they aren't telling us. Have a look at this tweet. Nejem SARS-CoV-2 can be detected in multiple organs, including the lungs, the pharynx, the heart, the liver, the brain, and kidneys. As I said before, quoting Scott Burke, what are the odds that a SARS-like coronavirus with overlapping genetics from HIV mutated and crossed over into humans? What are the odds it leaked out of the laboratory? If they can get you asking the wrong questions, they don't have to worry about the answers. These are the actions of a criminal covering her tracks. That's from Billy Boss Dixon. A paranoid is someone who knows a little of what's going on. Now, currency markets, dollar index 100.286. I'm expecting it to push higher. Euro dollar, we're currently at 108.06, and I'm expecting that to push lower, frankly. Crude oil has been a top performer, actually, and is now currently at $28.23. But I think we're going to run out of speed here because it is, at the end of the day, highly correlated to the hard stop. IEA is saying they've revised upward its forecast for demand for the whole year. It sees an average of minus 8.6 million barrels per day drop rather than 9.3 million. I don't see that. I think a return to a hyper-connected 100 million barrels per day world is not going to happen for the foreseeable future. Bond traders are pricing in the increasing likelihood of American airlines filing for bankruptcy. That's from Lisa Abramovitz. That confirms this move from a hyper-connected world to a world of quarantine. Traders don't have a very optimistic view about United Airline prospects either. Bond prices are also at new lows. Brazil is the global epicenter of the coronavirus, as I said in my weekend article. In Brazil, we have a toxic mix of a voodoo president, Bolsonaro, and a runaway COVID-19. It's tragic surrealism. I can't stop thinking about Gabriel Garcia Marquez when I think about the situation in Manaus. Brazilian real touched a record low on May 7. There's something about this market that just intensely dislikes Brazil. March outflows from Brazil were a -6 standard deviation event, i.e. completely beyond anything ever seen before. That's Robin Brooks, IIF. Coming to Africa, the IMF, as I said, has put some money to work, but it's a band-aid. The biggest African recipients of the IMF's emergency coronavirus funding can be seen in this, but it's not sufficient, in my view. The outliers are rolling over. Zambia is on the brink of a sovereign default. I wrote, the government there is not going to get any help from the IMF. Ratings agencies are throwing in the towel. Another devaluation looms for the naira. And I think regime implosion risk in sub-Saharan Africa is trending higher. Zambia's Eurobond yields have more than doubled since the start of 2020. That's via Bloomberg. This pandemic will quickly escalate from a health crisis to a humanitarian crisis and ultimately to a solvency crisis, what wrote Scott Minard. Over 72,000 confirmed COVID-19 cases on the continent, with more than 25,000 recoveries and 2,400 deaths. That's from WHO Afro. That's 24 hours old. But just think of this. 30th of March, there were 350 cases a day. 15th of April, 543. 30th of April, 1,900. 8th of May, 3,000 a day. 13th of May, 1,800. But we don't even have Tanzania in the mix. South Africa leads with 12,074 cases. I spoke about the spillover moment, and previously I'd quoted epsilon theory, nothing, 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 then cluster, 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 then boom. We're clearly seeing that now. Regime implosion risk in sub-Saharan Africa is trending higher. Political stability will be the last domino to fall, said Scott Minard, saying the same thing. I was saying Africa will be forced to go Juche. Juche is that self-reliant ideology of North Korea. Now, the African Bolsonaro is, of course, John Pombe Magufuli. And there was this Al Jazeera article saying a worker on duty opens a book where they are writing down all the burials for COVID-19 victims. And his father was the 256th name in the book. I was saying the worrying development is transmission hotspots. Kano, Western Cape, Dar es Salaam. Western Cape, yesterday, positive test hit rate was 13.751%. 5-day average 11.184%. South African average 5.121%. That's from Slipcatch. Cape Town becomes centre of South Africa's virus pandemic. The province now has more than half of the 12,074 confirmed cases nationwide, and in recent days contributed about 90% of new infections. Western Cape authorities attribute the surge in cases to a rigorous approach to testing, facing clusters of infections in households, workplaces and supermarkets. Localized outbreaks are common. We've seen it in nursing homes in the UK, recently nightclubs in South Korea. It's the normal biology of the virus, and it's beginning at a higher frequency in the Western Cape. We may eventually see this in other parts of the country. The question isn't why it hasn't happened in Gauteng, but why it hasn't happened yet. Makura says the hotspots in Gauteng have shifted from the suburbs to the more denser areas. This is from Jacka News. Have a look at those two images. South Africa's Reserve Bank is to cut rates by 50 basis points, market predicts. As I said about that China EM frontier feedback loop phenomenon, the phenomenon was positive for the last 2 decades, but has now undergone a trend reversal, and the Rand is the purest proxy for this phenomenon. Therefore, I expect the Rand to top 20. South African All Share minus 13.96% year to date. Dollar Rand at 18.48, but my target is 20. Egyptian Pound at 15.75. EGX30 minus 26.32% year to date. Result of yesterday's OMO auction by the Central Bank of Nigeria, no sale across the 3 tenors on offer, Zcrest Capital. 9th of December, I was warning about this in an article called Time to Big Up the Dosage of Quaaludes, and I said everyone knows how this story ends. When the music stops, everyone will dash for the exit. Well, they are, and they can't get out. Nigerian All Share minus 10.99% year to date. Ghana Stock Exchange minus 12.38% year to date. Africa arguments. We need to talk about burials, COVID-19 in Africa as the death toll from the coronavirus continues to rise. Communities in Africa and elsewhere need to think seriously about how to safely dispose dead bodies. Second set of risks comes after burial. Scientists have found that fluid from decomposing bodies can contain pathogenic microorganisms, including viruses. Researchers have shown that graveyards often contain vast amounts of heavy metals that leach from coffin materials. In a previous study, I was part of a team of scientists in South Africa which found that graveyards can contain dangerous bacteria that may contaminate groundwater. In short, without precautions, burial grounds could become potential environmental reservoirs for the coronavirus. That is indeed the way we live now, and each man's death diminishes me, for I am involved in mankind. Therefore send not to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. And there is something karmic in this COVID-19, and I can't help feeling that, like Boris got it, I think Pombe Magafuli's got it. Kenyan banks hoarding cash to cover faltering loans. This is from Bloomberg. Lenders snap up government debt as lending risks rise. Banks to hold excess reserves to brace for virus fallout. Moody's cut its outlook for KCB, Equity Bank and Co-op Bank to negative from stable this week because their holdings of government debt has now tied them to the fortunes of the sovereign. 23rd of December, I was writing about this. I said Kenyan lenders are the second most exposed to the government, with almost 300% of their equity lent out to the state. And I said what this tells me is that an important source of buy-side demand for government of Kenya shilling paper is now limit long. If you're sitting on the credit committee of a Kenyan bank and exercising some degree of oversight, and I would argue they're not, I would argue that then you should be demanding a hard cap. Taps run dry in Kenya's capital as coronavirus spreads. For a city that is under lockdown due to the pandemic, there should be water in the tap. There should be no excuse, said Boniface Mwangi. The shilling is at 106.90, Nairobi All Share minus 19.36%, and the NSE20 minus 25.78%. Wishing you a great weekend.